Well, we've finally reached lucky number 13. Wait, wrong slasher franchise? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be ranking the 13 films of the Halloween franchise as part of my franchise Rankography series. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. So what is a Rankography exactly? Well, it's my ranking of a filmography, whether that be a director's output, an actor's appearances, or even an entire franchise. My rankographies are based on personal preference, and I rank movies according to how much I enjoyed them, rather than any specific technical merit or attribute. Remember, this is just my ranking, not the ranking, so be sure to post your own personal ranking of the Halloween franchise in the comments below. Successful long-running franchises are an impressive feat. This is especially the case when you're talking about a horror franchise, one whose entire success depends upon a masked killer. The Halloween franchise now has 13 entries and has been going for 44 years. The 1978 original is one of the first movies people tend to watch when they begin to explore horror. Everybody knows who Michael Myers is. Everybody can recognize the iconic theme song. That first movie is quite literally synonymous with its namesake holiday. But what about the other 12 films? They're certainly not as well known or as frequently watched as the first movie, but the remainder of this franchise has some interesting, if highly varied, things to offer. I've already reviewed all 13 of these movies on this channel, so if you want to check those out for some more in-depth thoughts on each of them, I'll put links in the description below and also link some of them up in the cards as we go along. Alright, let's get this rankography started. Coming in at number 13, Halloween 2, the 2009 version. Rob Zombie's second film in the franchise is a bizarre and frustrating beast. It's the second Halloween 2 in the series, but this is a sequel to the remake rather than a remake of the sequel. Unlike the other Halloween 2, this isn't really a direct continuation of its predecessor so much as a traditional sequel that returns to the characters on another Halloween night. I gotta say though, that aspect is the only thing that could be considered traditional about this sequel. It's a strange and very unpleasant movie that's frustratingly unfocused, jumping among three basic storylines: Dr. Loomis's, Michael's, and Laurie's. Of the three, the Laurie storyline and its dealings with her PTSD shows some hints of promise, but is unfortunately overshadowed by the film's crushing negativity and stylistic choices. Of all the films in the franchise, this is the one that quite possibly exhibits the most directorial freedom. Rob Zombie was essentially given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted with this film, and he certainly makes it his own. Without the guiding outline of an original film, like he had with the 2007 remake, there's nothing to keep him within the bounds of reasonableness. And so his signature style of grimy, mean-spirited gratuitousness is amplified here to craft something utterly nasty, not just in terms of violence and gore, but also overall tone. Almost nonsensically, this nastiness and grindhouse aesthetic is paired with bizarre experimental art house elements that feature over-stylized hallucinatory visions. It's a strange juxtaposition, and only further accentuates the dull aimlessness of the film. Definitely the worst of the worst. Coming in at number 12, Halloween Resurrection. With this follow-up to H2O, Michael Myers is officially ushered into the internet age, in a horrible, instantly outdated fashion. I'm sure it comes as no surprise given the film's placement in my ranking, but this is one of the movies in the franchise that I truly, truly dislike. There are some bad ones, but there are also some awful ones, and this is one of them. Not only does the story here not really make much sense, but it also serves as an incredibly poor direct sequel to H2O. The highlight of this film is its intro sequence, but it's literally the only part of this movie that's actually a sequel to its predecessor. After those first 10 minutes, it's like the film just restarts and becomes an entirely separate and distinct story. And unfortunately for us, that separate story is pretty terrible. This film takes Halloween and turns it into a reality show, or at least centers it around one. It's remarkable how much of a nothing movie this is. The premise is throwaway, the characters are wholly unlikable and have no motivations or distinct qualities, so you don't care about them. Now, that could have meant that the fun of this film would be watching all of the creative ways that Michael was going to take him out, but even Michael feels like a nothing presence here. No stakes, no tension, no scares, just a bunch of grainy early 2000s webcam footage that we're forced to watch on computer screens in the movie, because we're watching other characters watching a live streamed web show. It's no wonder this was one of the dead-end movies in the franchise. Coming in at number 11, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. The sixth film of the franchise closes out the so-called Thorn trilogy, and is easily the worst of that bunch. To be fair, this film had a lot of issues going on behind the scenes, the biggest and most impactful of which being the inability of the filmmakers to agree on a singular vision for the film. The producers and writer wanted one thing, the studio wanted another, the director was kind of stuck in the middle with his own ideas of what the film should be. This butting of creative heads resulted in reshoots and multiple cuts of the film, producing an incredibly disjointed final product that nobody was particularly proud of. Even taking all of that into account and focusing on the original producer's cut, this is not a good movie. The Thorn trilogy had been a confusingly jumbled mess from the start, but what was a minor issue in Halloween 4 had blown up into convoluted absurdity by this film. The movie's loaded with plot conveniences, and even though it all attempts to explain the random and illogical aspects of the Myers films, going all the way back to the first movie, its explanation is somehow even more random and illogical. It has a few interesting kernels of ideas, but it takes everything too far and becomes laughable rather than satisfying. This movie does interestingly bring back the character of Tommy Doyle, played with exceptionally creepy intensity by Paul Rudd, but they do some odd things trying to incorporate him into the story, and it only adds to the poorly executed convolution of it all. As with Halloween Resurrection, it's no wonder that this was another one of the dead ends in the franchise. No chance of resurrection with this one. Coming in at number 10, Halloween, the 2007 remake. As the only true remake within the franchise, this film is a bit of an outlier. Perhaps not as much of an outlier as the Michael Myers-less Halloween 3, but it's certainly different as a result of the inherent baggage that remakes carry. Even more so than sequels, remakes really need to work at justifying their existence. And when we're talking about remaking a beloved classic like Halloween, that's even more difficult to accomplish. As you could probably already tell just based on my placement of this movie in this list, I don't think it quite accomplished its task. Although I don't think a remake was a great idea, I can understand the frustration that followed the release of Halloween Resurrection, and the desire to shock the system of the series. And this film certainly does that. The Halloween films have certainly never been happy movies. They're full of ominous atmosphere, sporadically creative slasher killings, and just general horror vibes. But the remake of Halloween makes all of the films that came before it feel like cozy fall afternoons. Not because it's any scarier, but because of the style and focus. This is a grimy, mean-spirited movie that's just wholly unpleasant to watch and experience. It shifts the focus to Michael Myers, and with an extended prequel-style origin story taking up almost half the film, it bizarrely tries to cultivate a sense of sympathy for Myers. This certainly goes hand in hand with the scuzzy grindhouse tone and style of the film, but I don't think it works, because not only does it remove the mystery of Michael Myers' motivations, but he also shouldn't be a character that is redeemed, and so the justification and rationalization here just feels wrong. Coming in at number 9, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. Chronologically speaking, this is the first movie in the franchise that I dislike. The sequels that came before it weren't necessarily great, but they weren't bad. This one, on the other hand, this is one of those instances where I just don't understand what they were thinking. Halloween 4 wasn't a masterpiece or anything, but it had a great ending that was a clear springboard in a new and interesting direction. And this film did nothing interesting with that setup. In fact, it partially retcons it, and then proceeds with a less than mediocre story. As a result, the first half of this movie is extremely dull. Things pick up a bit in the second half, but they certainly don't make any more sense. The story here is such a jumbled mess. It frequently contradicts things that were established in the previous film, and even the new things that it establishes here are left frustratingly unexplained. This is the second film in the Thorn trilogy, and we get glimpses of what's to come with that arc, but they're random and have no bearing on the story, so we have a lot of imagery that's introduced that results in nothing. The other contradictory aspect of this movie comes from the characters. This is a direct sequel to Halloween 4, so there are a number of returning characters here. But it sure doesn't feel like it, because they're really just the same characters in name alone. Nobody feels the same. Nobody feels like a continuation of who they were in the previous film. Loomis is completely unhinged here, and with this film's bizarre attempts to humanize Michael Myers, Loomis might just be more insane than the killer now. Coming in at number 8, Halloween 2, the 1981 version. This first sequel in the franchise is an unusual beast. On one hand, it's a film that tries to hang on to the roots set down by the first film. Rather than taking a more traditional sequel route, this film sets itself up as a direct continuation of 1978's Halloween. It's set on the very same night with the same characters, picking up immediately where the original film left off. But on the other hand, the sequel takes a drastically different stylistic approach. The slow-building dread and suspenseful tension are gone, instead replaced by bombastic action, plenty of blood, and a much higher body count. Despite its position as a continuation of the first film, it's a movie that feels like it has more in common with other contemporary 80s slashers, like Friday the 13th, than it does with Halloween. As the first sequel in the franchise, it was inevitable that this film would be compared to its predecessor, but the continuation aspect to its story only solidified that comparison, forever linking the two films. In some ways, that helps to boost the legitimacy of this film. By once again focusing on Laurie, Loomis, and Michael during the night he came home, it creates the impression that it's of a similar quality to the first film. Unfortunately, that connection also obviously has a negative impact, because even beyond the stylistic shift, this is a significant step down from its predecessor. The characters, the story, the score, everything seems like a lesser copy. It does hold up reasonably well when the first film isn't fresh in your mind, but how often are you going to opt to watch part 2 of a film without recently watching part 1? Coming in at number 7, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. After the experimental standalone offshoot of Halloween 3 was met with box office failure and fan pushback, the decision to bring back Michael Myers was made, and as the film's title suggests, this is the one in which he returns. He returns to the franchise, he returns seemingly from the dead, he returns to Haddonfield, he returns to his old stalker ways. Michael Myers is doing a lot of returning here. Likewise, the franchise is doing a bit of returning here. This movie kicks off the Thorn trilogy of the middle of the series, so it sets up some unique story directions, but it's also still very reminiscent of the original 1978 Halloween. The core plot is almost identical. We've got Loomis being as Loomisy as ever, and the film's full of both visual and auditory callbacks. So in many ways, this movie kind of feels like a lesser version of Halloween. It's got some really good sequences with nicely built tension, but it's also got some absurdity. The whole plot and main premise of this movie is a bit of a stretch that doesn't always make the most sense. And other than the moody opening shots, this film doesn't do the best job of establishing or maintaining that seasonal yet ominous atmosphere of the first movie. It's definitely a much more rushed, action-forward story that utilizes elements standard to 80s slashers without going too crazy with them like its story predecessor did. This is kind of just an okay sequel for the most part, so what pushes it up in the ranking? That ending. Coming in at number 6, Halloween Kills. So to be honest, my number 6 and 7 spots are still practically interchangeable right now. Halloween Kills still gets the slight edge, but only just barely. As we had previously seen with Only Halloween 2, this movie serves as not only a sequel, but a direct continuation sequel, picking up on the same night as Halloween 2018. Strangely enough, though, this movie doesn't really carry on with many of the plot threads established by its predecessor. Now, obviously, this is still a movie about hunting down Michael Myers, and it's not like it ignores or retcons the events of the last film, but the focal points have changed here. This movie is less about Laurie and her family's dealings with Michael Myers as it is about the town of Haddonfield's dealings with him. There are a lot of characters in this movie, including a few satisfyingly familiar faces, but as a result of having so many characters, the movie feels like it's trying to do too many things, which is kind of ironic considering the movie largely feels like filler. It's got plenty of interesting connections to the other films in the franchise, and more blood and gore than we've seen in any of the other movies, apart from Rob Zombie's efforts. So it's not a movie that's lacking in entertainment value, it just feels like it's lacking in substance. By sidelining its predecessor's main characters and proceeding with an unfocused amalgamation of story threads, this movie feels less like a film with individual significance than it does one whose main purpose is to tide the story over and set up for its sequel, something that doesn't exactly pan out. Coming in at number 5, Halloween Ends. The conclusion to David Gordon Green's trilogy, and possibly, unlikely, the franchise as a whole, Halloween Ends is a bizarre film. Although its predecessor was essentially an extended stepping stone film, setting up for the Laurie versus Michael Myers showdown that had been building for 4 decades, this movie subverts all expectations. Rather than being about Laurie, or even really about Michael, this film is about Corey Cunningham, a newly introduced character. That alone is a strange decision, focusing the final film of a trilogy on a brand new character, as opposed to the characters we spent decades with, but the specific route the story takes is an even more unexpected decision. It probably sounds like I should be ranking this one a little bit lower than I am. And even though the minimal focus on Laurie and Michael Myers is disappointing to me, I did find this to be an engaging story. I like the character of Corey, and although his storyline was predictable and quite rushed, I appreciated the Thorn trilogy implications at play, and thought his character tied in nicely with the film's themes. A big 2-hour-long Michael and Laurie fest would have been satisfying and fitting, but this movie focuses even more on Haddonfield than its predecessors, and on the evil that had infected it for over 40 years. The trauma has taken its toll on individuals and the community across generations. It's no longer just Laurie's trauma and pain, it's the entire town's, and that's reflected in the film's unexpected focus. Coming in at number 4, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. This is a very divisive movie in the franchise, so you're either going to think this is reasonably placed in this ranking, or that I'm completely insane. Because even though this is part of the franchise, it has nothing to do with any other film, and is effectively a standalone movie. No Michael Myers, no Laurie Strode, no Loomis, no Haddonfield. It's not even really a slasher film. It's this odd mix of murder mystery, paranoid thriller, and sci-fi horror that never really reveals all of its cards, or genres, until close to the end, so it can certainly feel a little wild and confusing at times. There's no denying that this is a very strange movie, with an even more bizarre story, but there's something fun and oddly intriguing about its otherwise baffling qualities. The story doesn't make a ton of sense until close to the end, and even then, saying that it makes sense might be a bit of a stretch, but at least it comes together to feel cohesive. The performances and characters vary quite a bit, and I personally think Dr. Chalice is a super skeezy asshole who has zero chemistry with Ellie, but I do still find his mission here compelling. This movie is a major outlier in the franchise. In hindsight, it seems a little crazy to make a Halloween movie without Michael Myers, but I can appreciate what they were attempting with this proposed idea of an annual Halloween-centric anthology series. I just think expectations got in the way. Even my own expectations left me severely underwhelmed by this movie the first time I saw it. But with adequate mental preparation and an understanding of what this movie is, I've found that it's become one of my favorites in the franchise. Coming in at number 3, Halloween H2O, 20 years later. The 20th anniversary of the franchise brings not only a new film in the series, but the return of Laurie Strode. After the convoluted absurdity of the Curse of Thorns storyline across the previous 3 films, it was a welcome relief to find that the 7th film was a bit of a first for the franchise. Completely abandoning and ignoring the storylines of the previous 4 movies, H2O acts as a direct sequel to Halloween 2. But unlike the temporal connection between the first and second film, which both occurred on the same night, H2O takes place 20 years later and focuses on an older Laurie Strode who faked her death and moved to California to start a new life after that fateful Halloween night. In many ways, this film almost doesn't even feel like a Halloween movie. It's set on the campus of a California boarding school, rather than in Haddonfield. It splits its time between a group of very 90s teens and the adults in charge of the school. Even Michael feels like a generic slasher antagonist. But Laurie grounds this to the franchise. Jamie Lee Curtis is excellent in her role here, and elevates the film greatly. She has severe emotional trauma and PTSD from her teenage encounter with Michael Myers, and some of the most interesting elements of the story stem from her struggles with dealing with those past events. And of course, with the history between her and Michael. This film sets up for one hell of a showdown that entertainingly lasts for nearly a third of the film. Something that can't be said of any of the Laurie versus Michael showdowns that would come later in the franchise. Coming in at number 2, Halloween, the 2018 version. In spite of its woefully unimaginative name, this 40-year anniversary film is easily one of the best in the franchise. Coming 9 years after its predecessor, the longest gap in the franchise's history, this film made the bold yet ultimately correct decision to disregard every other sequel in the series. Instead, it's a direct sequel to the original film and the original film only. As a result, there are quite a few things that get retconned here, including Michael's fate at the end of the first film, as well as the nature of the connection between Laurie and Michael, which was something that wasn't established until Halloween 2. But by wiping the slate clean and not having to contend with all of the story fragments and ideas of the sequels, this movie was able to get back to the basics and deliver a new 40 years later story with the benefit of nostalgia. As was the case with H2O 20 years before, the return of Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode is a massive highlight of this film. She just takes these movies to a different level. And just like in H2O, this film largely centers around Laurie trying to deal with her PTSD from her encounter with Michael all those decades ago. But this is a different take on it, and a slightly more interesting one. That Halloween night in 1978 completely altered the course of Laurie's life, and the lives of everybody associated with her. She's definitely still very emotionally damaged from her ordeal, but rather than fear, we see determination and preparedness. The other characters in this film aren't nearly as interesting, especially the teenagers, but the callbacks and references to the rest of the franchise that are scattered throughout this movie are very fun for fans. And any iffy moments that may happen in this movie get completely overshadowed by this film's killer third act. So that means my number 1 Halloween movie is Halloween, the 1978 original. Bet you didn't see this one coming. Nope, this pick is just about as obvious as Michael Myers wearing the ghost costume, but it's clearly the best film in the franchise, by a big margin. Halloween has developed quite a legacy over the last 4 decades, but this is one of those films where the seemingly universal praise is warranted. While I don't think it's a particularly scary film, it's an incredibly tense and suspenseful one. It takes its time to set up an ominous and foreboding atmosphere, so when things finally do start to get more action-intensive during the third act, you're already on edge, and so the simplest things pack a huge punch. In fact, simplicity is one of the best things about this film. There's really not all that much to the plot of this movie. Michael Myers escapes custody, stalks Laurie for half a day, and then decides to go on a mini killing spree that night. But the plot is less important than the way the story's presented. It may take place over the course of a single day, but the pacing and tension make us feel like we know these characters and this town. The cinematography is remarkably simple, even a little imprecise at times, but it further contributes to the atmosphere and tension of the film by planting a seed of doubt in our minds. From one scene to the next, we never quite know if we're watching things as a member of the audience or as Michael Myers himself. Even the score and John Carpenter's brilliant theme is simple. It's just a handful of musical cues repeated over and over again, but it's so effective at creating and enhancing the overall tone. And that really sums up this movie as a whole. Simple, but extremely effective. Alright, so that's my rankography of the Halloween franchise. 13 movies, 44 years, and a whole lot of stabbing. What does your ranking look like? I'd love to see some reasoning for your order, so be sure to post it in the comments below. Remember, I've already reviewed all 13 of these movies, so you could check those videos out if you want some more in-depth discussion of each, as well as my ratings, pros and cons, and even tailored film recommendations. And if you're interested in buying any of these movies, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this rankography, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.